Hello friends, this audio aims to explain you the basics of carbohydrates and lipids and is a part of NMEICT project, an initiative of MHRD. We will start with the introduction of carbohydrates. What is carbohydrates? Friends, carbohydrates are commonly known as sugar, starches, saccharides, etc. Carbohydrates are known as the key energy source for living things. The chemical composition of carbohydrates is made up of elements like carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Carbohydrates are chemically defined as polyhydroxyaldehydes or polyhydroxyketones. The term saccharide is commonly used for carbohydrate, which is a Latin word saccharum, which means the sweet taste of sugar. It also means hydrate of carbon. Carbohydrates are one of the three macronutrients, a group that also includes protein and fat. These organic compounds are a vital part of both plant and animal life. Carbohydrates play a key role in a healthy, balanced diet. Principal role of carbohydrate is to supply energy in the form of glucose. Glucose is a simple sugar and often called as a blood sugar, since it is the main carbohydrate found in the blood of mammals. The health and the functioning of every cell relies on blood glucose. For example, if our diet lacks appropriate amount of carbohydrate, then our body lacks a key fuel source. Carbohydrates, along with proteins and fats, comprise the major components of living matter and are used for the maintenance of cellular functional activities and also as the structural material for cells. Chemistry of carbohydrate is complex by the fact that there is a functional group on almost every carbon. Carbohydrate exists in either a straight chain or a closed ring structure. Ring structure contains two additional functional groups, the hemiacetal and acetal. Closed ring are the most common basic structure of carbohydrates, and glucose is an example of a single closed ring carbohydrates. Now let us know how carbohydrates are formed. Carbohydrates are formed by green plant in the process of photosynthesis. What is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is a complex series of reactions which utilizes carbon dioxide molecules and water molecules from the air and energy from the sun to produce a simple sugar such as glucose and oxygen molecules as a byproduct. These simple sugars are then converted into other molecules such as starch, fats, proteins, enzymes, DNA, RNA, that is, all the other molecules in a living plant. Humans acquire their carbohydrate needs most efficiently from the plant world. What are the functions of this important biomolecule, carbohydrates? Carbohydrates have wide varieties of roles to perform in the cell, in the living system. To start with, carbohydrate functions as a biofuel. It also functions as a primary source of energy, as a storage food, as a framework in body, as an anticoagulant, also as an antigen, as a hormone, also provide raw material for industry, are essential for fat oxidation. It even plays a role in gastrointestinal functions. Sometimes it adds flavor to the diet. Carbohydrates play a very important role in molecular recognition. These are few important functions of carbohydrates, which includes everything. Now we move towards the nomenclature and classification of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are classified in many different ways. Firstly, we'll see that carbohydrates are classified according to the number of carbohydrate unit in each chemical structure. When carbohydrate compounds have one carbohydrate unit, they are called as monosaccharides. Compounds with two carbohydrate unit are called disaccharides. Compounds between 2 to 10 carbohydrate unit are called oligosaccharides, and those compounds containing more than 10 carbohydrate unit are named as polysaccharide. All this carbohydrate can be broken down in its simplest form, that is monosaccharide. Carbohydrate in its simplest form are classified according to their number of carbon atoms and functional group. For example, according to the carbon number atoms, triose. Tri stands for 3 and the suffix "ose" indicates sugar. So, triose. Likewise, tetrose, pentose, hexose, heptose, and so on. Carbohydrates can even be classified according to their functional groups. The two main groups are aldose and ketose. What is aldose? Aldose means it contains the aldehyde group. The sugar in these groups are glucose, galactose, ribose, and glyceraldehyde. And the one which contains the ketone groups are ketose. And the best example of ketose is fructose. Carbohydrates are even divided into two groups, reducing sugar and non-reducing sugars. Reducing sugar means it contains free aldose and ketone groups. For example, glucose, maltose, fructose. And the non-reducing sugar are those which does not have free aldose and keto groups. Example is polysaccharides. Now, the first major group of carbohydrate, monosaccharides, we'll see in detail. Monosaccharides are the simplest carbohydrates and are classified according to the aldehyde or ketone derivatives, as well as the number of atoms contained in the molecule. Hexose contain 6 carbon atoms and are found in all the foodstuff, while when you see pentose, ribose and deoxyribose, which contains 5 carbon atoms, and this is formed during the metabolism of foodstuff. These are the only sugars that can be absorbed and utilized by the body. All the disaccharides and the polysaccharide must be finally broken down into monosaccharide in the digestive process known as hydrolysis. Examples of monosaccharides are glucose, galactose, fructose, ribose, glyceraldehyde. Now, what is glucose? The word glucose is a Greek word which means sweet wine or grape sugar. In nature, glucose is the most abundant sugar which is converted to polysaccharides. Excess glucose gets converted to starch in plants. In animals, it gets converted into glycogen. As well as in fungi, it gets converted into glycogen. Plant cells are made up of cellulose, which in turn is made up of glucose. Glucose is the most important carbohydrates in nutrition. It is one of the body fuels which directly supplies us the energy. The second example of monosaccharide is galactose. It is also a Greek word galact, which means as a portion of lactose in milk. Galactose differs from other simple sugars like glucose and fructose, how as it does not occur free in nature. Digestion of lactose, a disaccharide, leads to its production. Another example of monosaccharide is fructose. It is a Latin word fructus, which means it is found in fruits and honey. It is one of the sweetest sugar. Fructose is classified as monosaccharides and is very similar to galactose. These sugars have the same chemical formula but differ in the arrangements of their chemical groups. Bees collect nectar from flowers which contain sucrose. Another example is ribose and deoxyribose, which are the building blocks of the nucleic acid known as DNA and RNA. Ribose is used in RNA and deoxyribose is used in DNA. The deoxyribose means it lacks an alcohol, that is OH group. Ribose and deoxyribose are classified as monosaccharides. It is aldose, it is pentose and are reducing sugars. Second major group of carbohydrate is disaccharides. What is disaccharide? Disaccharides on hydrolysis give two monosaccharide molecules. Disaccharides are compounds that contains a bond between the first carbon of sugar 1 and a hydroxyl group at any position on the other sugar. Disaccharides are sugars containing two hexose units such as sucrose in cane sugar, maltose in malt sugar, and lactose in milk sugar. These sugars are hydrolyzed into monosaccharides, and it is done by specific enzyme in the digestive tract and have an important role to play in human nutrition. As examples of disaccharides, it is sucrose, maltose, lactose. What is sucrose? The word is a French, which means sucre, a disaccharide containing glucose and fructose. Sucrose or table sugar is extracted from sugar cane or sugar beets, in which it is plentiful. It is also found in fruits and vegetables. Sucrose contains glucose and fructose units. The glucose and the fructose unit are joined by an acetyl-oxygen bridge in the alpha orientation. Refined sugars and brown sugars contain almost 100% sucrose. Another example of a disaccharide is maltose. It is also a French word known as malt. It's a disaccharide containing 2 units of glucose. Maltose or malt sugar is the least common disaccharide in nature. Maltose occurs in the body as an intermediate product of starch digestion. When maltose is hydrolyzed, it gives 2 molecules of glucose. It is found in the germinating grains and in small proportion in corn syrup also. It is a reducing sugar. Another example of disaccharide, lactose. It's a Latin word known as lact, a disaccharide found in milk which contains glucose and galactose. Lactose or a milk sugar occurs in the milk of mammals. 4 to 6% in cow's milk and 5 to 8% in human milk. It is also one of the byproducts in the manufacture of cheese. Lactose is made from galactose and glucose units. The galactose and glucose units are joined by an acetyl oxygen bridge in the beta orientation. The enzyme lactase is needed to digest lactose, and this enzyme is not present in most, if any, people over age 3. This is one of many reasons why milk is an objectionable food for people over 3 years of age. Another class of carbohydrate, polysaccharides. Polysaccharides contain many sugar units in long polymer chains of many repeating units, which is joined together with the elimination of water molecule by a glycosidic linkage. Polysaccharides are not water soluble, as are the mono and the disaccharides. Though not water soluble, starches can be dispersed in water, but when it is heated to a certain temperature, the granules of the starch swell and gelatinize, and when cooled, this gelatin sets to a paste. The gelling characteristics of a starch are due to amylose, while amylopectin is considered to be responsible for the gummy and the cohesive property of the paste. Polysaccharides cannot be directly utilized by the body as disaccharides, but must first be broken down into monosaccharides, the only sugar form the body can use. There are 4 polysaccharides that are important in nutritional science, that is, starch, dextrine, glycogen, and cellulose. We'll see starch in detail. Starch is abundant in plants as a reserve material and helps the plant to sustain their root and tubers during winter and nourish the growing embryo during germination. It is found in the granular form in the plant cells, and it differs in its size and shape from plant to plant. For example, in wheat the granules are oval shaped, whereas in the corn it is rounded and angular shaped. Starch granules are present in the storage organ of a plant, like seed, root, stem pith, and tubers. Starch is a polymer of glucose unit. It is a mixture of 2 different molecular structure, that is, amylose and amylopectin. Amylose is a linear polymer of alpha-D-glucose. It contains about 200 glucose units, which are linked to one another through alpha linkage, which involves carbon 1 of glucose unit with the carbon 4 of other. Whereas amylopectin, on the other hand, is slightly branched polymer. It consists of a large number of branches of short chains, each containing 20 to 25 glucose units, which are joined together through alpha linkage involving C1 of glucose unit and C4 of the other. The C1 of terminal glucose unit in each chain is further linked to C6 of other glucose unit in the next chain through carbon 1 and carbon 6 alpha linkage, which gives amylopectin a highly branched structure. The ratio of 2 fractions varies according to the species of plant. For example, potato starch and most cereal starches have nearly 15 to 30% amylose. But when you see the waxy cereal grains, some varieties of corn, pulse, rice and grain sorghum have more quantities of amylopectin. Another example of polysaccharide, glycogen. Glycogen is the reserve food in the form of glucose in humans and animals. It is to animals as starch in plants. It is synthesized and stored in the liver and muscles. About two-thirds of total body glycogen is stored in the muscles and one-third is stored in the liver. It consists of long polymer chain of glucose unit joined by alpha-acetyl linkages. Glycogen is similar to amylopectin, having a molecular weight and branched chain structures, which is made up of thousands of glucose molecules. However, it has even more branching and more glucose units are present than in amylopectin, which results in more compact bush-like molecule with greater solubility and lower viscosity. In amylopectin, the branches are separated by 12 to 20 glucose units, whereas in glycogen, the branches occur at an interval of 8 to 10 glucose unit. Another example of a polysaccharide, cellulose. Cellulose is the most abundant naturally occurring organic substance. It contains over 50% of carbon in vegetation and is the structural constituent of the cell wall of plant. It is the major component in the rigid cell walls in plant. Cellulase is a linear polysaccharide polymer with many glucose monosaccharide units, which is connected by beta-acetyl linkage, which results in a major difference in digestibility from starch. It is characterized by its insolubility, its chemical inertness, and its physical rigidity. Human cannot digest cellulose because the appropriate enzymes to break down the beta-acetyl linkages are lacking, but can be digested by herbivores such as cow, sheep, horses, goats. In humans, it is passed through the digestive tract unchanged, but undigestible cellulose is the fiber which aids in the smooth working of the intestinal tract. No vertebrate can digest cellulose directly. Though we cannot digest cellulose, we find many uses for it. Wood for building, paper products, cotton, linen, rayon for clothes, nitrocellulose for explosive, cellulose acetate for films, and many more. Another example, dextrine. Dextrine are the most commonly consumed in cooked starch food, as they are acquired from starch by the action of heat. Dextrines are intermediary product of starch digestion and are formed by the action of amylases on starch. They extract the disaccharide maltose on hydrolysis. Now we come to the nomenclature of carbohydrates. The major carbohydrates encountered in the body are structurally related to aldotriose glyceraldehyde and to ketotriose dihydroxyacetone. Stereoisomerism is an important character of monosaccharides. What is stereoisomers? Stereoisomers are the compounds that have the same structural formulae but differ in the spatial configuration. A carbon is said to be asymmetric when it is attached to 4 different atoms or groups. The number of asymmetric carbon atoms determines the possible isomers of a given compound, which is equal to 2 to the power n. For example, glucose. Glucose contains 4 asymmetric carbon and thus it has 16 isomers. Glyceraldehyde is the simplest monosaccharide, an example of triose with 1 asymmetric carbon atom. Glyceraldehyde exists as 2 stereoisomers. The D and L isomers are the mirror image of each other. D-glyceraldehyde and L-glyceraldehyde. The spatial arrangement of H and OH groups on the carbon atom that is adjacent to the terminal primary alcohol carbon determines whether the sugar is D or L isomers. If the OH is on the right side, the sugar is D type, and if it is on the left side, it is considered as L type. In naturally occurring monosaccharides in the mammalian tissues are mostly D configuration. Another important term, optical isomerism. Carbohydrates containing asymmetric carbons. Because of this, carbohydrates are optically active and rotating the plane polarized light. If the plane polarized light is rotated to the right, that is clockwise, the compound is dextrorotatory, which is indicated by D, small d or plus. And if the plane polarized light is rotated to the left, the compound is levorotatory, which is indicated by L or minus sign. Another important term is epimers. If two monosaccharides differ from each other in their configuration around a specific carbon other than anomeric, they are considered as epimers to each other. For example, glucose and galactose. They are the epimers of each other with respect to the carbon number 4. The interconversion of epimers is known as epimerization, and epimerase is the enzymes which catalyze this reaction. Another term, enantiomers. Enantiomers are a special type of stereoisomers that are mirror image of each other. Some of the chemical and the physical properties of many sugar has shown the cyclic forms which predominate over the chain structure both in solution and in solid state. The aldehyde and ketone moieties of the carbohydrates with 5 and 6 carbon will spontaneously react with the alcohol groups present in the neighboring carbon to produce intramolecular hemiacetals and hemiketals. In glucose, the OH group on carbon 5 can react intramolecularly with the carbonyl group on carbon number 1 to form a stable cyclic hemiacetal. The cyclic form of glucose is a 6-membered ring. Such sugars are called as pyranose, as they resemble pyran. Fructose forms a 5-membered ring called furanose. The configuration of glucose can conveniently represented by Fisher formula or Haworth projection formulae. The spatial relationships of the atoms of the furanose and pyranose ring structures are more properly described by the two conformation identified as the chair form and the board form. Another important term, mutarotation. Mutarotation is defined as the change in the specific optical rotation representing the interconversion of alpha and beta forms of D-glucose to an equilibrium mixture. The specific optical rotation of a freshly prepared glucose, that is alpha anomer, solution in water is 112.2 degree, which gradually changes and attains an equilibrium with a constant value of plus 52.7 degree. The optical rotation of glucose is plus 18.7 degree.